Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I swear by the time quarantine ends, the only thing I will have increased in my weight. Yeah, I think there's gonna be some weight gain across the board. It's way harder to stay active. Free time increases, procrastination. Agreed. Justin, you got it. This is some Donkey Kong tunes. What's MW3? Modern Warfare 3? Oh, dang. There's a new Call of Duty, right? That's Battle Royale, and it's free to play, right? Aquatic ambience, yeah. It's so relaxing to me. Warzone. I haven't played it yet, but I've watched a little bit. Seems really cool. I officially hooked Ike on these lo-fi beats. Good. Glad to win you over. I've been enjoying them a lot. We'll wait until about 12:04, and then we'll get started on our lecture for today. Quarantine and chill radio lo-fi trap. Yeah, the Zelda lo-fi is especially good. Good, you made a playlist on YouTube. That's the way to do it. What's Bandori? Install ad blocker on Chrome extension. Oh, does that help with like YouTube ads? Alex says, do we have all the knowledge necessary for homework 6? Because I'm a little stuck. LOL. Yes, at this point, you have all you need for homework 6. As of Friday part 1 lecture, that's everything you need. Friday part 2 is going to help with Project 1, which is coming out real soon. But yeah, you have everything you need at this point to complete homework 6. Alright guys, we'll get started here. Turn down the music a little bit. Hopefully all of you guys are out of bed. You people waking up at noon. Goodness gracious. So here's the handout for today. I put it up on UB Learns. Good morning, Chris. Did you just wake up too? I woke up around 8 this morning, but it wasn't easy. All right, so just like usual, I'm going to recap a little bit of where we have come from, and then we're going to finally finish up our controller selection today. That's kind of fun. All right, so the past 3 times we've met, we've been working on designing a controller for this antenna. And the goal of this is we want it to be able to track a satellite in the sky. So this antenna is kind of panning back and forth. And specifically, we're making a controller that helps with tracking the azimuth angle. So that's like if it's rotating about this z-axis here. And so that azimuth angle is phi. And when you're tracking a satellite in low Earth orbit, you have to move pretty slow. So one of the performance requirements was that for this antenna was that it has to be able to track a 0.01 radian per second ramp reference signal. And that's supposed to represent a satellite panning across the sky, and you just got to keep this antenna pointed at it. So I think it's a cool practical example of how we can use digital controls. So, okay, let's get into this recap a little bit more. To meet the performance requirements, we proposed these closed loop poles. And if you're just catching up with us now, I think you got to go back a couple lectures to see how we did that. And then we used the angle criterion to figure out that if we want to achieve these closed loop poles, then our controller needs to come up with this angle contribution with respect to those target poles. All right. And a controller that can do this is the controller parameterization we've been working with the root locus all along. Because it can come up with the angle contribution you need, and it's also a causal controller. So it depends on present and past information, so you can implement it on hardware. Now, the first thing we did is we just chose a value of alpha for this controller. And if you do that, to satisfy the angle criterion and to satisfy the magnitude criterion, this is the controller that you need to achieve those target poles we went for. So in this case, so we went through this process. We made this controller, and then we found out that the 3 closed loop poles, if you have this controller, 2 of them are the target poles you were going for, which is great. That's the whole point of root locus design, that you achieve those target poles. And then we had this third pole. And we didn't really like this third pole very much. So this is what we did in the first part of lecture on Friday. We talked about how can you simulate the response. If you missed it, you can catch up the video here. In all the videos, if you click underneath the video, there's a link that says show more. I put little timestamps so you can jump to the relevant part of the video. But so this controller that I described up above, which isn't our favorite, this is how it performs when we give it a ramp reference. And we also looked at how it responds when we give a step reference. So let's talk about this ramp response first. So this ramp is just like our performance requirement. It's 0.01 radians per second. So you can imagine, and this is the azimuth angle over here, by the way. So this is imagining if we have a satellite moving at 0.01 radians per second, and we have to move this big antenna to track it. Looking at this, it does a pretty decent job. Like in red, we have the reference that we're trying to track, and then the black is the actual output of our plant, like the measured azimuth angle of our actual system. And, it's pretty much right on top of the reference here. It has a little bit of a jagged response if you zoom in really tight, because our third pole is on the negative real axis, and that's a characteristic of poles on the negative real axis. They have a jagged response. So probably the most important thing is looking at the control input that was required to create this response. So the control input is, for this example, it's the torque provided by your drive system to rotate this big antenna. And we said it's a practical consideration to minimize the amount of torque, especially because this thing has to be chewing up so much power to move that huge inertia of the antenna, right? So this is the most troubling thing, in my opinion. Our control input is bouncing back and forth between positive and negative torques, kind of like this. And that's going to introduce probably significant wear and tear on the motors. It's constantly reversing direction, generating a back EMF, and all that stuff. And this is mostly a consequence of that third closed loop pole as well. So like I said, this isn't our favorite controller so far. Now, if you look at the step response, you'll see that this controller doesn't even meet our original performance requirements. Like, for example, we wanted 16% overshoot. But if you look at the step response of this controller, we're looking at something like 50% overshoot right now. Right? And we need a settling time of 10 seconds. And, honestly, it looks like this controller basically settles around 10 seconds. It might be, it looks a little bit more delayed, but it's not off by much. But this overshoot is definitely unacceptable. And same thing with the control input here. To track this step reference, we're jumping back and forth. Large magnitude of torque here. And that'll become even more apparent when we compare it to the controllers we're going to make later on. So the point of our first part of the lecture on Friday was how can you simulate this in MATLAB, and this was the result. Now, that brings me to part 2 of our lecture on Friday, because we said, okay, the first controller we kind of picked arbitrarily, and it didn't work very well for us. So how do we pick a better one? And there's good news and bad news. The bad news is I don't think there's any way around iterating, like coming up with a bunch of controllers and just comparing them to each other. The good news is you don't have to do this on pen and paper. You can make the computer do it for you. So it's really not too bad to come up with, like on Friday we came up with 100 different controllers. We could have done 1,000 and it would have probably been reasonable. We just made a for loop. So this iterative approach, you can check out that video here. I put little timestamps on there too. But I'll recap a little bit of what we did in part 2. So just like with the first controller we made, with our iterative approach, we picked a bunch of values of alpha. And then you just build the controller around that. But first, you have to define what the acceptable region of alpha is going to be. Like, you can't just pick anything. Ooh, I'm missing an angle sign here. So what I like to do when I'm iterating on controller design, I like to start with like, let's just pick a couple angle contributions for alpha and just roll with it. And so this symbol right here, you've probably seen it before. It's like a mathematical set symbol, and it means that the angle contribution of alpha with respect to our target pole can exist within this range. So the smallest angle that we can have is the angle contribution of dz. So smallest possible angle contribution of alpha. This is the smallest possible because, and you can go back to our other video to see some more explanation of this, but this requires that our pole for the controller is at infinity. I can't remember, I think it's at minus infinity. And if you have a pole at minus infinity, first, like, you want it to be a clearly defined number. You want it to be like, well, I put my pole at 3, not at infinity. But if you have a pole at infinity for this parameterization of a controller, I think it also makes it acausal. So that's our smallest angle. This is the biggest angle we can make with our 0. And this is the biggest because it requires that our 0 is at infinity. And I believe it's positive infinity. So we define this range of angles that we can test because this is practically the only range we can do. Like, this requires your angles to your poles and zeros to be at infinity, so you can't go any further than that. So because I'm doing all of this in MATLAB, I define this range. So this is MATLAB language for the same thing I wrote above. Like the angle of DZ, maybe I'll change colors here. For this specific example, that was 1.39. And you might be asking yourself, where did this like 10 times pi over 180 come from? I'll get to that in a second. This pi is over here. And if you don't know how the linspace command works, you give it the smallest number as the first argument, you give it the biggest number as the second argument, and the third is how many numbers you want to generate within that range. So we started by making 10 controllers. So I said like n is equal to 10. Like give me 10 alpha angles, and I'll make 10 controllers around that. Okay, so this like 10 pi that I added here, I called this padding. Like if it were 1.39, like if the angle of alpha was 1.39, I know that beta would be at infinity. So I can't actually place beta there. So I make this angle a little bit bigger so that beta doesn't have to be at infinity. Same thing here, I subtract a little bit from the largest angle. This is also, I'm just calling it padding. Because if I had the angle at pi, that would mean alpha's at infinity. Because it can't be at infinity, I need to make that angle a little bit smaller so that it's some defined number. So this is the first step of iterating. Andy says, wouldn't adding angle at the beginning and subtracting the same angle at the end make the angle range smaller? And why are we doing it? You're right, it makes the angle range smaller. And I hope the explanation I just gave explains that a little bit to you. It's because if I use the full range, then it would place the first and last angles in that set would create poles or zeros at infinity. And because I don't want that to be the case, I restricted the range a little bit, so I bring those values in tight so they're not at infinity. Okay. Let's go. So we can choose any number other than 10, certainly. Yeah, I just started with 10 because that's, I don't know, something like I'm going to try 10 different controllers. But if you go to this figure, so we defined 10 ranges of alpha. You're welcome, Andy. And then we've done this over the past couple of days. We've built controllers around alpha. We use like the angle criterion, the magnitude criterion. Maybe I'll go to our code really quick just to review it. I'll just scan through it. This is going to go down memory lane and I'm going to blast you with a lot of code. But like, I think this set of code is when we made our first controller. We said alpha was minus 0.5 and we built our controller. We solved for the gain, yada, yada, yada. Then on Friday, part 1, this is where we simulated the response of that controller. Part 2, we started iterating on the controller design. And yeah, just like you said, do we have to make n equal to 10? No, we changed it to 100 because we're like, I want to try more controllers. Here's the angles that I want to try. And then we made this for loop where we said, based on the angles, to give me that controller. And in this loop, we calculated what the closed loop poles of each controller would be. And this is probably the most important part. If you go back here, this is the result of calculating the poles of each controller. So there's, we'll look at this axis, the x-axis. So this is alpha, and this is when we chose 100 different possible alphas. So I chose those angles. These are the corresponding alphas that create those angles. And for each alpha, there's a set of 3 poles. Right now, you're only seeing 2. And we talked about this. You only see 2 because well, this is the real part of the closed loop poles. These ones have 2 poles on top of each other because those are our target poles. Our target poles are a complex conjugate pair, which was, I think, like z star equals 0.4 plus or minus 0.4i, something close to that. So this is the real part being 0.4 for all those target poles. So this is just showing for all 100 combinations of controllers. I achieved the target poles for all 100 controllers, but the thing we have to watch out for is the third pole is changing with all of those. So I have a video that looks like this figure on the right, and this helps explain that a little bit more. Let's go to this right monitor. So I'll pull this past. So let's look at the legend first. So the red circle is the 0 of DZ, so that's like alpha. Alpha corresponds to the 0 of our controller. The pole, the red X is our pole of our controller, and that corresponds to beta. So as I'm shifting this along, notice first that alpha and beta are changing. That's our controller in red. The black X's are the 3 closed loop poles. And notice for every combination of alpha and beta, these 2 X's here remain the same because those are our target poles. And that's what we based our performance on. And so every controller achieves those target pulls. So the real part and the imaginary part of these remains the same for every controller that we made up. The thing that's changing is this third closed loop pull. Like if I use this combination of alpha and beta, our third closed loop pull has a real part at like minus 1.5. That means that our system will be unstable. That means our antenna is going to like go out of control and break itself. So you certainly have to bring that third pole inside. If that third pole is on the minus real axis like it is here, so like anywhere in here, it's going to have this jagged oscillatory response. So we want to choose a controller that has this third pole at least probably in the positive range. So like here's 0. And now this third pole is positive real. Let me pull this video down a little bit. Oh, no, I just did that thing again. Don't panic. I'll find it again. Okay, do this. I want to like resize it. Okay, so now you can see as I change these, I'm listing the alpha and beta at the top. So like now the third pole is on the positive real axis and alpha is minus 0.6. So if I do anything bigger than minus 0.6, alpha goes to the minus real axis. So I know, like, just looking at this, I probably want to choose alpha greater than minus 0.6 so that my third pole has a positive real part. And then if I keep making alpha smaller, so now it's like 0.7 minus 0.8. If I make alpha like more negative than minus 1, it's going to be unstable on the other side because this third pole goes out the other way. So this video helps us to make sense of this plot over here. Because what you were watching in the video is you're watching this third pole like go through its possible values. So the thing to do once you've like made, I don't know, 100 controllers is you want to start to narrow your decision. So like, let's say I want my third pole to be positive and I want it to have small magnitude. So maybe I'm going to make some space here. This line represents, like anything above this line has a real part of 0. So this means it's going to be positive. And if the real part is greater than 1, that means it goes unstable. So I have to also be within here. So like this represents stability of the root. So you can see that if I want to be stable and have positive real, then that kind of narrows my search to like, I don't know, between here. So like I can have an alpha between like minus 1 and minus 0.6 or something like that. And then if I want the alpha to be closer to 0 so that it's like smaller magnitude, then I probably move this boundary like this way. Because you see alpha is getting like smaller as I go that way. So if I, maybe if I move this in a little tighter, I'll have a third root that's positive and it has relatively small magnitude. And this is how you narrow down your alpha range. So maybe this is like minus 0.7 or something. So after you've done, like you made 100 controllers and you looked at the closed loop poles of all of them, then you say, all right, I'm going to narrow my search so that my alpha values are between like minus 0.5 and minus 0.7. And this is where we left off. So this is where we're going to continue the example and we'll finish up. So this is the next thing I'm going to do. I chose, like, from this new limited set that I want to try, I'm going to make like 5 controllers just to start. You could do even more. And here's the restricted range of alpha that I want to try. So like between minus 0.7 and minus 0.5, right? So my reasoning was, Ike says, would we want to display the entire set of poles generated when we make one of these graphs? Or would it make sense to just have the code trim off the oscillatory and unstable roots for us? Yes, you can do that, but I didn't know, like when I made those initial 100 controllers, I didn't know which ones would be oscillatory, unstable, etc. But like before you plot, like before you make this plot in your code, you could restrict like the axes, for example. Like you could say, don't waste my time plotting things with a real part, like outside of 1. Like don't give me something unstable. So yeah, actually that's a really great idea. Like once you've created this initial set, you could throw some logic in your code to just throw away controllers that you're not going to want to look at anyways. Yeah. So this option I chose, it has third pole is positive real, which means it won't have these jagged oscillations. And it has small magnitude, which means it won't dominate my target poles. So it won't bottleneck the response time. Small magnitude, so it won't dominate response. Dominate just means it just means that the root is slower than my target poles. I think the magnitude of our target poles is something like 0.6. So if this third root has a real part with magnitude less than 0.6 or something, it won't be any slower than those roots. All right, so these responses that I'm showing here, these are the results of building 5 controllers around the 5 alpha values I made here. So we'll get to this later, but I want to show you some of the code I used to build these plots. And I think at this point, we've gone over the lsim command, so you know how to generate these responses, but let's go into the code a little bit. In class. Okay. So what you're seeing here, these first 2 lines I put in the notes, like I'm making the alpha values. And then this next piece here, because I'm going to use lsim to simulate my controllers, one of the arguments for lsim is you have to provide a time vector that you're going to use. Am I going to post these codes? I'm not going to post these codes, but because I want you to actually go through the physical exercise of typing them yourself. So you can definitely go back through the videos, look at the codes, review this. You can look at the codes that I posted in the handouts, but I'm not going to explicitly give you the IM file. Okay. So I'm making this time vector. And so I'm going to go from 0 to 10 seconds with intervals of 1 second, our sampling period. And then these are the references I'm going to try. I'm going to try a step reference. I'm also going to try a ramp reference. Here, I'm going to initialize some vectors to store my responses. So I'm going to have a vector, or a matrix rather, to store my step responses, because I'm going to store the step responses for all 5 controllers. So it's good practice in MATLAB to initialize a matrix of zeros where you're going to put in the data. So I'm going to make each column is going to store the step response. So the number of rows I need is going to be the length of my time vector, so that I have one element for every instance of time. And then I'm going to have m, which for now is 5 columns. So each column is going to be a step response of length t. And we're going to do this for the ramp response as well. And so these responses are going to store the closed loop, like, azimuth angle. So this is going to be the angle of our antenna. But I also want to get what the control is going to be. So the control is going to be the torque that's provided to our antenna to create these output motions. So this is going to be important to look at as well, because I want to look at the amplitude of these. All right. So I'm clearing some angles, some variables that I used before, because this code is kind of a run-on sentence, the effort of a couple days, and I want to like reuse the same variable names, but I'm going to like clear them so that I can just fill them with something else. Okay. So let me break down this for loop really quick. Remember, we're just picking 5 values of alpha that I know are good. Like, these are going to give me good controllers, and I'm going to just pick the best of these decent controllers. So from alpha, I need to get the angle contribution of each. And I think the easiest way to do that is just use the angle command. So I'm going to get the angle of each alpha with respect to our target pole, Z star. Once you have the angle of alpha, that lets you get the angle of beta, your 0, and then you can get the actual value of beta itself. So this for loop just builds the controllers piece by piece. We start with alpha, then we do beta, then we calculate the gain. So this is using the magnitude command. We've done this a couple times now. Our controller is the gain times our transfer function. Like here I had the transfer function without the gain incorporated. Now I'm just adding that gain on. This gives me the closed loop transfer function, and then I calculate the closed loop poles. I can calculate the static velocity error constant. But here's the part I really want to focus on. We want to get the step response and the ramp response of each. So my step response, we're going to do, remember, because we're storing these responses in the columns of this matrix. So I'm going to say the kth column is going to be, so this is how you simulate a step response. You go LSIM, and then the first argument is your transfer function. So that's our closed loop transfer function. The next argument is the reference command that you're giving. So we use the step reference we defined up above. And the third argument is the time duration over which you're simulating. So we're going to simulate the step response for each controller, and we're going to store that in a column. We're going to do the ramp response. We're going to store that in a column. Ramp reference. So now this loop is going to calculate those responses for all 5 of our controllers. Typo in line 97. Good joke. He says it should have said mineral, but it says minreal. He's just trolling. I forgive him though. Okay, now we're also going to calculate the control input. Now the way to do this, you can make the transfer function that relates your control input coming out of your controller to the reference that comes into your overall system. So this is the transfer function for that. This minreal command, it simplifies it down. All right. So I'm going to copy these lines of code. But this is going to be how my control is responding to these different references. So I'm going to use LSIM again, but I need to change my transfer function to this GU, the transfer function for my control input, how it responds to the reference. And that's it, guys. So you zero in on the controllers you want to try based on your analysis of the closed loop polls. And then I make another for loop to go through this limited set of controllers and calculate the response of each controller. And then here, I'm making the 2 plots that you see in the handout. Abhijit asks, shouldn't the control input be multiplied by the type of reference, step, or ramp we are applying? So the control input be multiplied by the type of reference we are applying. Remember let me address this real quick. So because we're done with this code anyways, because now all this code does is it makes the plots that we already have over here. So let me spend a second addressing that control input question. Maybe I'll put it down here. So I just have some extra room here. Ooh, we're doing good on time today, people. Okay. Remember our feedback loop. You have your controller D of Z. That produces your control input that feeds into your plant. And then this all, feeds back. So you got your reference coming in. You got your error. You have your control. And then you have your output. So when I'm plotting the control input, I know that, okay, if my reference over here is a ramp, so I'm tracking a satellite that's moving across the night sky, what is my controller, so like what torque is actually going to be provided to make that happen? Yeah, Tim says we're simulating the transfer function UZ over RZ, and that's exactly right. So what is the control input? It's your control transfer function operating on the error that comes into it. What is the error transfer function? So we've derived this a couple times. The error is related to the reference by this. 1 over 1 plus GZ/DZ times the reference. So like this, 1 over 1 plus GZ/DZ is the closed loop error transfer function. So the control input is your controller operating on that error. So our control input is DZ over 1 plus, so I'm just simplifying the expression above, So if you were to divide the right-hand side by RZ, you get this transfer function. And this is the transfer function I put in my code. So this is cool. You give like a step reference to this transfer function, and the output is what your controller is going to actually do. I hope that answers your question, Abhijit. We're going to go back up here. All right, let's look at this. So this is the step response of the 5 different controllers we tried. And so I was a little lazy. I put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but what does that actually mean? Like this one is alpha equals minus 0.7. And then this 5th one is alpha equals minus 0.5. And then all of the other options are like numbers evenly spaced out in between minus 0.7 and minus 0.5, okay? Now let's compare these controllers. Like the first thing I want to point out, our overshoot performance criterion was 16%. All of these controllers are less than 16%. It looks like all of them were like close to 15%. So we're good. We satisfy that. The other performance requirement was that we settle less than 10 seconds. If you look over here, all 5 of these controllers by 10 seconds, they're like right on the reference. And they've definitely settled less than like the 2% window that we usually use. So what's the difference between these controllers? Number one, like the rise time is different. Like this green one, so option 5, where alpha equals minus 0.5, it has the fastest rise time. It looks like in like 1.2 seconds, it hits the reference for the first time. The blue has the slowest at like, I don't know, so alpha is minus 0.7 here. Rise time maybe like 1.8 seconds, okay? And it has less overshoot. So alpha at 0.7 has the smallest overshoot, but the slowest rise time. Let's look at the control inputs. And this, I think, is most important, honestly, for me making my decision for what I would pick here. Isn't that 60% overshoot? Oh, shoot. You're right, Tim. You guys are right. This overshoot is too big. Uh-oh. Uh-oh, guys. This requires some reflection. Oh, shoot. Jonathan said. Guys, I seriously didn't notice that. Like, I looked at it as like 0.016, and I was like, oh, the overshoot. We nailed it. I have to reflect on this a little bit. I don't know. Gasp, Ike says. I don't know if this goes back to our target polls or whatnot. Okay, let's, for now, because the points I'm going to make are still good for the sake of comparing these. And then I'll go back after the fact and try to dissect what's going on. Or maybe you guys have already figured it out because you figured out the overshoot was wrong. I didn't see that. I should have. I'm disappointed in myself, frankly. Okay? Okay, let's go back to this. Let's imagine that didn't happen. Okay. I want to look at the control input. And the way you think of this is it's like the torque. Controller 5. Tim says, don't be. I read it as 16% the first time as well. Well, that makes me feel better. Controller 5 definitely has the largest amplitude of torque. Like this first part, it goes up to like 0.18 or something like that. That is quite a bit more amplitude than our controller option 1, which it looks like it goes to like 0.08. It's like more than twice the amplitude. And if you think about like the energy that it's eating up over time, it's like the performance of these controllers is not way too much different in terms of the transient response, but in terms of the energy they require, there's actually a pretty big difference. And so I think for me, if I was choosing the controller here, I would be more concerned about this input energy here. And I'd be like, look, we can have huge energy savings for a relatively small trade-off in performance. So that's the step input. If we look at the ramp, it's a similar story. Oh, this legend is unfortunately placed a little bit. But you can see, once again, there's some similar characteristics here. Like our controller 5, the green one, more quickly catches up with the reference. And then at the very end, you can kind of see a little bit here, it has the smallest steady state error. Yeah, I should have done southeast with the legend. So green gives us the smallest steady state error. And then blue gives us the most steady state error. But I think that the magnitude of this error is still within the constraints. And if you look at the control input, we have the similar story once again. This green controller is faster because it uses a lot more energy. So if I'm looking at these, like assume that this overshoot was satisfied by all of them. We'll go back and check that. But assuming that all of these controllers satisfied the constraints, I would probably pick option 1, the blue one, where alpha is minus 0.7, because if all of these basically satisfy the constraints in the same way, why not use the controller that conserves the most amount of energy? Blue's the smooth rider. Exactly. And guys, that's basically what I wanted to walk you through today. To recap, because we're finishing out this example, I wanted to recap, like, this is the process we went through. Generally, if you just pick a controller off the top of your head, it's not going to perform like you want. So you need to go back and iterate and like pick a range of values that you try out, and then you zero in on the things that you think are going to be best. Once you do that, you can do a little more detailed analysis like we did at the end. You can take like the cream of the crop, your best controllers, plot their responses, and then look at what they do. And that is the design process, my friends. So I'm going to officially end the lecture here, but I'm going to hang out for a couple minutes to just take questions. But this will be the timestamp in our video that the lecture has ended. What questions do you guys have? I enjoy hanging out with you guys Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I like having that rhythm. I hope you enjoy it too. It's a good time. It's good to keep some structure in our schedules, even if you're waking up at noon each day. You guys need to tighten that up. That's getting sloppy. You need to back it up to 11 a.m. first. Lewis says, why are you looking at alpha and not beta? No particular reason. No particular reason. You could probably go through this whole process picking a value of beta and then just figure out what the alpha needs to be. Abhijit says, what do we do about that overshoot condition, though? The first thing that I want to try, I want to look at, were my target polls in the first place acceptable for getting the right overshoot? You know what I mean? Because I think they were. But is it like, did I accidentally do like 60% overshoot? But I do think that I think our target polls were correct. So then the second place that I would go is, so this is something we need to think about. The overshoot formula that we derived that for a second order system with no zeros. Let me show you what I mean. So the overshoot formula, it's derived with respect to a transfer function that looks like this. So this is in continuous time, by the way, but I think it's s squared plus 2 zeta omega and s plus natural frequency squared. And then you can convert this to discrete time and whatever. But that formula assumes that there's no zeros. There's just 2 poles, no zeros. This closed loop transfer function that we made, it has zeros. And zeros, they don't affect stability, but zeros can affect overshoot. Let's look at our closed loop transfer function. Wait, it's not defined. Why would it not be defined? Didn't we just run this code? Maybe I didn't run it. Yeah, if you look at this, it's third order, which makes sense. If you look at the denominator, 3 poles, and it's got 2 zeros. What if we expand this range of alpha? Because the overshoot was getting smaller the more negative we made alpha. So why don't I make minus 0.8 and then I go like minus 2? Is that going to make it unstable though? What's the most negative I can make alpha? think I can only go to like -1 with alpha before that third pole goes unstable. All right, we're going to try -1. We're going to test our luck. This might give us some unstable ones. So I'm changing the range of alpha. .01. Wait. Some of these... Like this one has acceptable overshoot. But it looks like it settles really slow. Let's simulate it a little longer. Maybe like 15 seconds? I don't know. Whoa. That's weird. Now this has like steady state error as well. That shouldn't be happening. Oh. Wait, if I make alpha -1, that means I put a 0 at 1 and it cancels the 1 from my open loop transfer function. And that was what was making it type 1. So I can't have it there because that'll wreck my type 1 condition. But it looked like a couple of these didn't. Yeah, it makes sense that this one has steady state error. But the others should like converge, right? What if I like make it go really long? You guys are getting a behind the scenes look at like how I try to debug. Oh yeah. So it makes sense. This one has steady state error because I wrecked its type 1 condition. But all the others eventually converge. So I found some that satisfy the overshoot, but they're kind of slow. Maybe there's like an even tighter window than I even thought. Let's see if any of these settle by 10 and have the overshoot that works. This red one's close. It has the overshoot and it's maybe settling by 10. The yellow one, it looks like it overshoots a little too much, but definitely settles by 10. Which alpha value was that? That was our third. It's like alpha 3. -0.9? Interesting. Maybe that's the best. I'm really thinking that the thing that screwed up our overshoot is this these zeros. I think that's what it must be. And you know what, you can't like. He says, I think it's legit because think of the weight of the antenna to rotate. Would checking a different Z star. Oh, you know what, Ike, that's a really great point. That's a really great point. All of these problems that I'm having, we started by picking some target poles, Z star. And I picked them. Let's go back to the notes. This is my own fault, guys. Let's look at this. Check this out. These target poles that I picked are like right on the boundary of satisfying the overshoot condition. Like this purple boundary is the damping ratio condition that satisfies the overshoot, you know? And even without having any zeros factor in, I would have barely satisfied it anyways. So you can do what I'm doing, like kind of just tweak the alpha values more, but it probably would have been a better initial choice to maybe bring these a little bit interior. The trade-off is going to be, well, I don't know. I was going to say it might take more control effort to bring these, because these poles that I just chose, they'd be closer to the origin, which means they would settle faster. And usually settling faster means that you have to put more energy in. Because if you put zero energy, it would never settle, right? So putting more energy makes it settle faster. So actually, so maybe picking roots that are like out here, like they'll have the right overshoot, but yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Ike. I think just picking a different Z star is the best way to go about this. If you bring more inside, the overshoot will be less. That's right. The higher your damping ratio, the less overshoot you get. It's good to generalize your code. I wonder if I did it in this code. But you want to make your code general so it's not too much work to go back and change your target poles. You don't want to make more work for yourself. Like that's the nice thing about MATLAB. Like you can design your code so that, okay, I'll just try a different Z star and it'll just rerun everything for you real quick, and then you can pick some new ranges. Are you teaching road vehicle dynamics in the fall? Yes. Yes, I will be. For this example, you multiplied the step and ramp reference by 0.01. Do we multiply anything by our step or ramp in homework 6? Let me pull up homework 6. Ooh, I said unit step reference, unit ramp reference. So go look up what that means, and that'll answer your question. Will we be doing any PID control this semester? I'm planning on not really focusing on PID. Now, so the type of controller we're making right now, I might mess this up, but I think it's like a PI, or it might be PID. But PID is like really, really popular in industry. But I kind of like root locus is a really good technique to know, and when you do root locus, it doesn't naturally like give you explicitly like PID and stuff. Even though it turns out if you were to like break down the controller, it might be one of those types. And our next topic is going to be state space control, which is super useful. And you can also translate into what equivalent PID controller you would get from a state space method, but you're not focusing on like what's the P, what's the I, what's the D. that might be a little strange. Like, oh, I'm taking a controls course. We're not focusing on PID. But I think these are all very useful techniques that we're going to show you. How are we supposed to answer on question 2? Based on these plots, which controller would you choose? Justify your decision. So you got to... you could use the same kind of reasoning that I was using at the end of lecture today, right? I have some plots comparing the various responses. And I make my decision based on, are the performance constraints being satisfied? What is the... we're being raided by a party of 12 who is hitting us with little Z's. The little cute dog. If it wasn't so darn cute, you know, I would just boot you all out on the street. Math raid! You guys are welcome. You're welcome to join. Will office hours be on Twitch or Zoom today? You know, I'm gonna keep going with Twitch for now. Based on the Google survey feedback, I had a lot of people prefer Zoom, but most people preferred Twitch. And Twitch has been going pretty well so far, I think. So I'm still open to writing that out. Babu Rao says, would it be different for each condition? What are you talking about? I'm not in this class, but I got recommended it on the front page. Welcome, my friend. Glad you're here. We're learning about digital control systems. We did a satellite example today, or an antenna tracking a satellite. For homework 5 and 6, I did them completely in MATLAB, and I didn't realize how close my code looks to yours. Will that lead me to losing points on the assignment? It doesn't... Because I'm providing a bunch of code in lecture, I don't mind if you're recycling that code for this part. I think that's okay. I'm trying to give you like some standard tools, standard commands. I'm trying to teach you some efficient coding structure. So if you want to like use that for homework 5 and 6, that I'm okay with, just because I like explicitly gave it in lecture. Small communities you might like. Welcome to the community. Glad you're here. Thanks for that, Tim, for answering that question. I appreciate it. You know what I'm going to do now? I'm going to turn up the beats a little bit. We're just going to boost that in there a little bit after this ad. I'm so sorry. So sorry about that. I know, the beats. We're bringing the beats back. Who pointed out the overshoot problem today? I'm so glad you did that. I didn't even, I did not see that. Oh, man. Is this Cowboy Bebop? Yes, it is. Yeah, this is definitely like 50% overshoot. That's way too much. Estes Beats. That's right, my friend. We're gonna go back to when you're designing a controller, it's nice to make something like this as well. So you can see in a more visual way where the roots are moving. I like to do this. Like it's a little bit of work to make a code like this on the front end, But once you have it, you can just recycle it for any problem and see where your poles move around. If we made any mistakes in homework 5, will we lose points again on that for homework 6 since they're using the same numbers? So Ben, what you want to do, I put up the homework 5 solution. So what you should do before you submit homework 6, go check that out, make sure you're on the right track. Abijit says, so should we satisfy the overshoot condition for all values of alpha, or just choosing the ones that satisfy the overshoot condition? Let me think about that a little bit. No, you just want to choose the ones that satisfy the overshoot condition. Your end goal is to make, you only need one controller in the end. So you're going to pick the one that's best. What are the green, red, and blue lines? Is that how the target poles would move if we changed K? That's exactly what it is. So these green and blue lines, yeah, and red, this shows where your 3 poles go as you change your gain K. Let's resize this a little bit. So like you can see K changing up here in the top of the figure. And I already calculated that K so that these closed loop poles exist right at that target pole location. Yeah, but if you change K, these could go anywhere on these colored lines. You could go anywhere. You could do anything. Oh no, another ad. Wow, unreal. All right, guys. With that, I know I should just install ad blocker, right? With that, I'm going to adjourn. I'll be back at 3 for office hours. And any other questions you have, bring them there. But in the meantime, have some lunch. Go on a run. Go to the park, but practice proper social distancing techniques. That's what you got to do in these desperate times. All right, guys, it's been real. I'll leave the tunes on for like a couple minutes. Feel free to hang out.
said bell peppers and beef.
His name's Asimov Solensen. Are you listening to me?
There's no beef in here. So you wouldn't really call it bell peppers and beef now, would you?
Yes, I would.
Well, it's not!
It is when you're broke.
Jet, do you know that there are 3 things that I particularly hate?
Really?
Kids, animals, and women with attitudes. So tell me, Jet, why do we have all 3 of them neatly gathered in our ship?